Good morning, friends, and welcome to New Garden Friends meeting. I'm so glad that we are able to gather together in this digital space. You are welcome here at New Garden Friends meeting. You are welcome here whether this is your 500th time worshiping with friends or whether it is your first time. You are welcome here no matter your age or race or sexual orientation or gender identity. No matter your politics, what was your first language, your immigration status, or where you may be on your spiritual journey. We welcome your questions and your seeking. You have a place here among friends. Friends, it is a joy to have Bill Eagles with us this morning, bringing the prepared message. He will also bring our reading for this morning. And for those of you who do not know Bill, he is a longtime member at New Garden Friends meeting and is a gifted preacher. So I'm delighted that he will be bringing our prepared message this morning.
Friends, before I do the reading, there are two things I wanted to say. One is that all notions to the contrary notwithstanding, I categorically reject any notion that the thunder and lightning and rain and wind was some divine commentary on either the message I intend to bring or the fact of me bringing it. You should use your own judgment, but I reject it. The second thing is that we're going to turn our minds to the this morning in a little while to the interplay between worship and community. And I, on my own behalf and on Catherine, my wife's behalf, have been the beneficiaries of the loving warmth of this community over the last few weeks. When I had some health issues that are moderated, at least in the moment. And as I was working on this message, it came home to me in a little different way. And I wanted to thank and really express my joy in being a part of this community. Our reading this morning is from the 6th chapter of Matthew, some selected verses. This is a portion of the Sermon on the Mount. Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise, you have no reward from God in heaven. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the street, that they may be seen of men. Verily, I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet. When thou hast shut the door, pray to God which is in secret, and pray to thy God which seeth in that their God which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. After this manner, therefore, pray ye. And this is from the King James Version. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Howard Brinton, a 20th century Quaker writer, scholar, leader, led Guilford College for a time in its difficulties, but also was, Pendle Hill and Earlham College and a Harvard-educated physicist. Writing about the Quakerism coming into being, opined that when waiting worship, silent worship, quiet, unprogrammed worship came into being and was coupled with the decision-making process that we use, that Quakers use, that this combination was the beginning of something different, something that had not existed, and that something was came to be known as Quakerism. And even now we talk about our meetings for business being meetings for worship with attention for business. So these concepts intermingle in a way that we find effective, meaningful in business. Sometimes business meetings with attention to business, sometimes a little aggravating and uplifting at the same time. But as I was thinking about today, it seems to me that these things taken together or individually, it speak to a sense of community within the body. That this is true of worship when worship is at its best, and it's true of our business processes. And it's part of the reason, it seems to me, that our system, the interplay of community and the process, our system works so well in monthly meetings and meets a different kind of challenge sometimes in larger bodies and yearly meetings or other bodies where people come representing someone other than themselves. And it was a different kind of challenge. When we were looking a moment ago at, well, we're going to focus on the worship side, or I trust we will, of that equation. And on the worship side, the dealing with whether worship is best, most effective, speaks to us most as when it's a corporate activity of a community or an individual activity of a seeker or a believer, and as we will conclude, that no doubt there are elements of each. And we're going to look at, like people who share Christian tradition often do, for thoughts to try to get our mind around these questions, thoughts from the Bible and from the readings this morning. If you will accept for this purpose that almsgiving, that helping the poor and those less fortunate than us in a material way, or providing for places of worship and people to financially providing for the community as a form of worship, and I believe it is. The first verse I read about alms giving would indicate that perhaps this was an individual activity. best done even in secret. The church, little country church I was raised in, I had two kinsmen that have had stories that seem parallel to me in looking at this. One, in the middle of the last century, it was time to build a new church building. And he pledged a whole lot of money. And he pledged an equal amount in the name of his brother and sister, not for him to pay, but for them to pay. And he did it without asking them, which is the reason the stories lasted. It truly is. Of course, he knew his siblings, and they did, but this was a very public act done almost certainly to encourage people to believe that this would be successful, and that and to encourage them to give to. The others of a different kinsman who there was a man in the neighborhood who was a cripple. He had a very pronounced problem with one of his legs, and it got worse as he got older. And he got some sort of public assistance as a result of this. I don't really know what it was. And but as time passed, he could do less and less work for day labor for farmers, and the money he got didn't last him out the month. And he went to this second kinsman of mine toward the end of the month and would ask to borrow some money and my kinsman would loan it to him. And then at the end of the year, my kinsman would take a kind of plate of candy and cookies that people share with friends in the holiday season, and he would take it to the trailer where the man lived, and he would give it to him and forgive that year's debt from this monthly borrowing. And that happened for a series of years. And but for a particularly odd set of circumstances, or unexpected set of circumstances, that ended up with me being told this story by my kinsman, no one but he and the recipient would ever have known. Which speaks to what should be done in public and what should be done privately, in secret. And how should that decision be made? It's made by what's in the heart, which you would think, and the verse from Matthew, then that examination would have to be done individually, and then the act undertaken. We read about prayer and how prayer should be done in the closet. And then right after that, we looked at these very familiar words about how we should pray, as the gospel writer sets out as Jesus' instructions about how to pray. And every pronoun in that prayer, as it has been preserved for us, is plural. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others of their trespasses against us. Deliver us from evil. Our Father, which art in heaven. That is not a closet kind of prayer. People will disagree about whether it's should be part of a liturgy or is just a pattern. But either way, it is something that is, it seems to me, presented as communal. And it takes communal activity to build community. And you can tell if it's there. You can go into a meeting house, and when there is a true community, it feels alive in a different way. Meeting up in Yadkin Valley, where that I only visited once, but it was alive with the people. That wasn't somewhere I would have chosen to be to worship regularly because of lots of reasons, but anyone would have been able to find joy in that community if that's what they were open to. A couple of months ago, I was an hour and a half away from here, and I was standing in the cemetery of a country church, more than a century-old church, but still a small country church, Methodist church. It was a hot day. You know, cemeteries, when it's hot, are the hottest places in the world, and when it's cold, they are the coldest places in the world. And this day, even though it was late spring, it was hot. And people had gathered there to bury the ashes of my friend. He had died several months before after an illness that lasted several years, during which he became less and less himself. And he died, and they waited because of the pandemic for a time to gather. And he'd been my friend for over 50 years. We grew apart and back together. And as I was thinking about it, it seemed that we would reconnect in times of difficulty rather than in times of joy. Difficulty in my life, difficulty in his. He had a falling out with his church over something that ultimately didn't seem very important, but it was important in that it was the seed for this falling out. And we talked about that and the why and the how and what to do. And it was overcome. And he was the important member of that community and that church that he had been before, and that his father had been before him, and his mother before him. And so I'm standing there, and there are 60 or 75 people, and it's hot, and the sun is shining, and the shade has been taken up by people other than me. So I was in the sun, and this community of people there, they knew each other, and they were there as a part of that community to comfort the widow and the family, and I would say to be witness to my friend's life. Across the road from the church and cemetery was the house that my friend had lived in, and it was still the empty, long empty silos stood witness to the life he had known he was going to have, but did not because of the way small dairy farms went during his lifetime. So people gathered, and the time came, and there was praying. There were two former pastors. Methodists have former pastors because they rotate them, and the pastors were actually, both of them were remembering being part of the community more than they were remembering my friend, and it seemed, and there was a little singing, but not congregational singing. Also, the deference to the pandemic. My mind wandered. I had grieved for my friend as he became less and less himself, and when he died. And I had driven more than an hour to the funeral, and my mind had been on him. But as I stood there in the sun, my mind wandered. And I started reading the tombstones around me for no particular reason. And my eyes fell upon this stone that said, Mrs. Warner, dates unknown. That's all it said. How could this be? I wondered. How could it be that they know her last name, but not her first, that they know she was married, that they buried her, but they don't know when she died? Why is it like this? This wasn't an expensive stone, but it was a professional stone from sometime in the middle of the last century, I would guess. What it cost to buy a casket and open a grave in the middle of the last century? Who decided that that was where the resource would go? Was it an individual, or was it a decision that was acquiesced in by the community, or was it the community's decision? And as I was thinking about how a community could come to make that decision of someone who it seemed they knew so little, or it would have been on the stone. I sort of forced my attention back to the service, and of course my mind started wandering again for the same reasons. And then my eyes fell upon another stone that was inscribed in its entirety with the words, unknown infant. No name, no date. Nothing. Well, whatever speculations I had had about Ms. Warner's life and death, well, they had taken a variety of forms, some sort of strange, some libertine, some bewildering, several sad. A couple were funny. But every path that I could imagine that led to a grave marked unknown infant was heartbreaking. I imagined a distraught young woman going to the minister for help. I imagined a father coming in shame and anger. I imagine a bewildered young man coming in fear. I imagined the death being discovered by someone not personally involved. I wondered if the decision to bury this child was individual or corporate. And if it was a corporate decision, was it a decision about this child, or a decision about what kind of community did they want to be? I watched my friend's son and grandchildren shovel dirt into the grave as the widow and the community looked on. Spoke to some people. I hugged the widow. I declined refreshments and I drove home. In Ecclesiastes, the author says, a good name is like fine perfume. The preacher, the author of Ecclesiastes, in honoring that good name, was talking about people like my friend. Even as he had ceased to be himself and had been the subject of care rather than the giver of care. The unknown infant. I can only imagine is having almost no life at all in the sense that we think of. And Ms. Warner's life in any of those scenarios that I had grafted upon her, it seems had declined from better days. The day of death can provide release from life, from what life is, or what it's become. What I witnessed that day, both in my friend's service and in the these other two graves, and the community's response to the circumstances, it seemed to me was likely a corporate ministry of the community. Steps were taken to honor that of God in the faithful member, in the innocent, and in the unknown. Perhaps others, with open hearts and minds and with a mindfulness of worship, corporate and individual, mindfulness of worship, and mindfulness of the content of their own hearts, can build and serve the divine community that we seek.